"I'll call the police," my brother shouted, red-faced, standing in front of my own fireplace. The irony almost made me laugh. A few hours earlier, I'd been chasing silence. I'm Clara Whitmore, 38, born in Denver, shaped by ambition and exhaustion in equal measure. I've spent most of my adult life closing real estate deals for other people's dreams, while my own waited on the back burner. The mountain lodge outside Aspen was my reward to my self-wood, glass, and snowlight bought with 20 years of restraint. Every December, it became my ritual escape. The drive up that night felt like slipping into another version of myself. The city lights vanished, the road narrowed, and snow whispered against the windshield. I remember humming along to an old Norah Jones song and thinking, just 1 week of peace. No calls, no clients, no family dramas. Then I saw it. 2 cars in my driveway, headlights dusted with frost. The first, a white SUV, was impossible to mistake. I'd helped my brother, Ethan, buy it last year when his credit wouldn't clear. The second was unfamiliar, an aging blue sedan, roof blanketed in snow. My stomach tightened. The lodge's porch light glowed warmly, too warmly. Through the window, I saw movement shadows crossing, laughter rising. For a second, I thought maybe the caretaker had rented it out by mistake. Then I spotted the Christmas garland wrapped around the banister, the kind my mother used to hang. No caretaker would know that. I parked, stepped out into the biting air, and reached for the key box beside the door. The code I'd given Ethan for emergencies only had been used. The lock clicked open without resistance. I pushed the door and the laughter inside went still. The moment I stepped inside, the warmth hit me first too dense, too human. The air smelled of butter, perfume, and wine, layered with the faint sweetness of pine from my tree in the corner. But it wasn't the tree I'd decorated. Tinsel hung unevenly, blinking lights clashing like static. 7 people turned toward me. My brother stood near the fireplace, sleeves rolled up, a half-empty glass of whiskey in his hand. On the couch, his wife Melissa lounged in one of my sweaters, her bare feet tucked into the wool rug I'd imported from Norway. Around her sat her parents, and 2 cousins I barely recognized from their wedding. Empty bottles littered the table beside plates of turkey and half-melted desserts. For a second, no one moved. Then Ethan smiled, wide and thin. "Clara, you're early. We thought you were still in Europe." My mouth went dry. Europe. Melissa rose from the couch with deliberate grace. Her voice was soft but sharp enough to slice through the quiet. "We told my family you let us stay while you were away. You know, a little Christmas generosity." The words landed heavier than the silence that followed. Behind her, the wall above the fireplace drew my eyes where my parents' photo used to hang, the one taken on their 25th anniversary. In its place was a glossy portrait of Melissa's family, all white teeth and matching sweaters. My throat burned. I looked back at Ethan. He couldn't meet my eyes. "It's temporary," he murmured. "We just wanted a change of scenery." My pulse thudded in my ears. The plates, the smell, the rearranged furniture, it wasn't a visit. It was occupation. I walked farther in, the floor creaking under my boots. No one spoke. Melissa crossed her arms and smiled again. That calm, smug kind of smile people wear when they think you've lost your voice. And in that moment, surrounded by my own things in other people's hands, I realized they weren't guests at all. They'd already decided this house belonged to them. I don't remember sitting down, but somehow my hands had found the edge of the counter. My wine glasses crystal, etched with my initials, were scattered across the island, filled with half-drunk Cabernet from my private cellar. One bottle stood open, its cork torn and stained. I drew a slow breath. "All of you need to pack your things," I said quietly. "Tonight." Melissa laughed, a sharp, hollow sound that didn't reach her eyes. Her cheeks were flushed, her words a little too loose. "Pack our things." "You can't be serious. We've been here for 3 days. You weren't even supposed to be back." Ethan shifted uncomfortably beside her, staring at the floor. "Clara, don't start drama. It's Christmas." The sentence landed harder than it should have. Drama. That was what he always called it, every boundary I'd ever tried to set. I looked around the room again, the coats draped over my sofa, the wine, the decorations. Every inch of it screamed ownership that wasn't theirs. "This isn't a misunderstanding," I said evenly. "It's trespassing." Melissa's smile curdled. She picked up her glass, took another long sip, and set it down too hard. "You're unbelievable. You act like this house makes you better than everyone. You're the parasite here. Clara. Always needing control. Always making people feel small." The word hit like a slap. Not for what it meant, but for who said it. My brother's wife, standing in my home, wearing my sweater, drinking wine I'd aged myself. Ethan didn't look up. He just sighed. "She didn't mean it." "Oh, I meant it," Melissa said, voice rising. "You think money gives you the right to treat us like charity cases?" "Then call the cops," I said softly. "Or better, have Ethan do it, for a heartbeat." No one moved. The fire crackled behind them, soft and steady, like it refused to take sides. Then I met Ethan's eyes for the first time that night. "Go ahead," I said, "if you can. If you—" His face drained of color, and in that silence, something between us finally broke. It took about 20 minutes for the flashing lights to slice through the falling snow. By then, the house had gone unnaturally quiet. The music was off, the fire had burned down to embers, and Melissa's phone lay face up on the table, still glowing from the emergency call she'd placed in a drunken fit. When the knock came, Ethan jumped. I opened the door before he could move. 2 uniformed officers stood there, their breath fogging in the cold. One was tall, with the kind of weary calm that comes from long winters on duty. The other looked younger, nervous but professional. "Evening," the older one said. "We got a report of a domestic disturbance. Mind telling us what's going on?" I stepped aside. "Please, come in. It's simple. These people entered my property without permission." Melissa crossed her arms, voice rising instantly. "That's not true. My sister-in-law lent us the lodge for the holidays, and now she's changing her story to make us look bad," Ethan added quietly. "She's overreacting. We're family. This isn't a crime." The younger officer frowned. "Do you have any proof of permission to stay here?" Melissa hesitated. "Well," she gave Ethan the door code. "For emergencies," I clarified, pulling my briefcase from the entry table. My fingers didn't shake as I laid out the papers, the deed, current tax receipts, proof of insurance, all with my name printed clearly. The older officer scanned each page under his flashlight. He looked up after a long moment. "Ms. Whitmore, these appear valid, which means this is your residence." His tone shifted. Polite but firm. He turned toward Ethan's group. "Without written permission or lease, you're considered guests who've overstayed. Refusal to leave could be treated as unlawful trespass under Colorado statute." The words hung in the air like frost. Melissa's parents exchanged mortified looks. Her mother finally whispered, "We're sorry. We didn't realize." Truly, Ethan's face had gone pale. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. I folded the documents neatly and met the officer's gaze. "Please, ask them to pack up tonight. I'll allow 2 hours." He nodded. "That's reasonable." Outside, the snow kept falling, soft and relentless, as if erasing every footprint that had ever crossed my threshold. The officers waited near the doorway while the living room filled with the sound of zippers and clattering luggage. No one spoke. Melissa's parents whispered apologies under their breath as they gathered coats, their faces drawn tight with embarrassment. Ethan moved like someone underwater, folding sweaters he hadn't bought, avoiding my eyes. I set my briefcase on the dining table, opened my laptop, and pressed the power button. The familiar glow of the screen washed over the room. My reflection appeared faintly on the glass calm, steady, unrecognizable even to myself. While they packed, I began typing. My voice stayed low, but every word seemed to echo against the wooden walls. "Ethan," I said, not looking up. "The apartment you're living in, that's one of my units. You've been paying less than half of market rate. That arrangement ends tonight." I clicked submit on the rent adjustment notice, effective immediately. A small chime confirmed the update. Melissa stopped folding a blanket. You wouldn't. I continued, scrolling through another window. Next, the SUV. The one in the driveway. The loan was co-signed in my name. Remember, I'm revoking my guarantee. The lender will be notified before morning. Another chime. Ethan muttered something under his breath, too quiet to catch. And finally, I said, the condo your parents live in. Melissa. I stood as guarantor for that lease, against my better judgment. I'll be withdrawing that signature tonight. The final chime was almost delicate. For a moment, the only sound was the wind pressing against the windows. Melissa's face drained of color. You can't just, my parents, I looked at her then, directly. I should have months ago. Her voice broke. Why are you doing this? Because I already did the other thing, I said softly. The helping, the forgiving, the pretending. Ethan finally looked at me, anger flickering in his eyes, but behind it was fear raw and human. He opened his mouth, closed it again, and turned away. Each confirmation tone still lingered faintly in the air, small electronic echoes marking the end of something larger. I shut the laptop, the click of its lid final, like a gavel. Outside, the snow thickened, muting every sound except the quiet rhythm of justice being restored one keystroke at a time. By the time the clock neared 10, the house looked like a storm had passed through, coats draped over half-zipped suitcases, crumbs on the rug, a smell of wine and cheap perfume still hanging in the air. Outside, snow was falling harder, piling against the porch railings and covering the tire tracks that would soon carry them away. Ethan stood by the doorway, his hands buried in his jacket pockets. The officers waited patiently, their radios crackling softly, boots wet from the snow. Melissa was the last to finish packing. She wiped at her mascara with the back of her hand and muttered something I couldn't catch. Her parents hovered nearby, pale and silent. When Ethan finally looked up, there was something almost childlike in his face, an echo of the boy who once followed me around to the neighborhood, always a step behind. We're family. Clara, he said quietly, you don't have to do this. I studied him, the way the light from the hallway brushed over his tired features. For a moment, I heard my mother's voice again, thin and breathless from the hospital bed. Protect him until he stands on his own. I did. I said, for too long. He flinched, just slightly, and dropped his gaze. The officers exchanged a glance, then gestured gently toward the door. Melissa moved first, her head bowed, the handle of her suitcase dragging against the floor. One by one, they filed out into the night. The wind pushed back against the open door as they stepped onto the porch. I watched until the last shadow disappeared down the path, swallowed by snow and silence. When I closed the door, the latch clicked louder than I expected. The fireplace flickered weakly, throwing small pools of light across the empty room. For the first time that night, I exhaled fully. The air inside the house felt heavy, but it was mine again. Morning light filtered through the frosted windows. Pale and cold, the fire had died in the hearth, leaving behind a bed of gray ash. The living room was a wreck, half-eaten turkey, a shattered wine glass, a tangle of tinsel crushed into the carpet. The air still smelled faintly of smoke and spilled champagne. On the mantel, my parents' photo frame lay cracked at the corner, the glass splintering across their smiling faces. I picked it up carefully, brushing away the dust. Their eyes warm, patient, and impossibly kind seemed to be watching me still. I took a roll of tape from the drawer, fixed the corner, and set it back in its rightful place. Then I lit a candle beside it. The small flame trembled, painting light across their faces until the room no longer felt empty, only quiet. I sat down, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee gone cold, and let the memories arrive. They came like chapters I'd been avoiding, rent payments quietly covered, loan signatures signed in the hope it would be the last, phone calls that began with "I just need a little help." I'd always told myself it was family duty, but duty had slowly turned into debt emotional. Invisible, endless. The truth hurt more than the broken glass ever could. My kindness hadn't healed Ethan. It had protected his weakness, wrapped it in comfort until he believed dependence was love. I'd mistaken enabling for care, silence for loyalty, exhaustion for generosity. For years, I'd told people my brother was just struggling to find his path, but now I saw it clearly. He never needed directions. He needed resistance, and I'd been too afraid to give it to him. The candlelight flickered against the repaired frame, catching the reflection of the snow outside. I whispered to them, to the parents who had asked me to keep him safe. I didn't fail him by saying no. I failed him by waiting this long. The flame swayed gently, as if in answer, and I let the silence settle, soft and clean, over everything that remained. 2 weeks later, Denver felt sharper, cleaner, as if winter itself had drawn hard lines around everything I'd left behind. I returned to work, to meetings and contracts, to the rhythm of ordinary life. Yet sometimes, in the stillness of my apartment, I could still hear the echo of that door closing at the lodge. On a gray Tuesday morning, my property manager called. His voice was careful, almost apologetic. Ms. Whitmore, the Whitmore Street unit. Your brother's still hasn't paid rent for this month. We sent the notice as scheduled. I stared out the window at the skyline, snow falling in slow motion between buildings. Follow the lease procedure, I said, no exceptions. That afternoon, another email arrived, confirmation from the auto finance company. The SUV had been repossessed without incident. Attached was a photo of it being loaded onto a tow truck, snow clinging to its tires. I stared at it for a moment, then dragged the file into the trash. There was nothing left to discuss. When my lawyer called later that week, his tone was steady. Everything's by the book. Clara, eviction filing. Lien releases completely legal. No one can claim coercion. No vengeance either, I said quietly. Just balance. He hesitated, then replied, sometimes that's the best justice you get. It was close to midnight when my phone rang again. The number was unfamiliar, but I knew the voice instantly. Clara, Melissa sobbed. Please, you have to talk to him. He's furious. He blames me for everything. We're staying with my parents, but he's losing it. Behind her words, I could hear shouting Ethan's voice, hoarse and raw, crashing through hers. A thud followed. Glass breaking. Someone swearing. Why are you calling me, Melissa? I asked softly. Because he won't listen to anyone else. You started this. I let the silence stretch until even the shouting dulled. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. There was only the sound of her crying, small and distant, like static. I can't help you, I said finally. Then I ended the call. The apartment went quiet again. Outside, snow pressed against the windows, muffling the city into something that almost resembled peace. By the time spring brushed across Denver, the city had thawed, but the air still carried that thin, mountain chill. I'd just come home from a late meeting, the kind where everyone talks about next quarter as if time can be managed like money. The apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet I used to find unnerving. Now it felt earned. My phone buzzed on the counter. Unknown number. I nearly ignored it, but some stubborn muscle memory made me answer. Clara. His voice was barely recognizable. Ethan. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us had grown too big for small talk. Finally, he exhaled. I'm sorry, he said. I know I don't deserve to ask, but please, just a place to stay until we get back on our feet. The sound of traffic drifted through my window horns, laughter, the life of a city moving forward. I leaned against the counter and stared at the candle on my windowsill, the same kind I'd lit beside our parents' photo. Ethan, I said softly, you'll find a way. You always do when you have no one left to lean on. He said my name again, like it might change something. Please. I cut him off gently. Next time you're in trouble, don't call me. Call the police. Like you did that night." The silence that followed was heavier than anger, emptier than grief. I heard him breathe once. Then the line clicked dead. I set the phone down, scrolled to the number, and pressed block. No hesitation this time. Outside, the city lights shimmered against the wet pavement, and for the first time in years, I realized I wasn't waiting for anyone's call but my own. By late April, the mountains had shed their white coat. The lodge stood quietly under a soft sun, its windows open to the smell of thawing pine and damp earth. I arrived early in the morning, a small suitcase in hand, the same one I'd brought on that winter night. The air felt different now, lighter, as if the house itself had exhaled after holding its breath too long. Inside, the rooms were clean again. The caretaker had polished the floors, washed the linens, even left fresh flowers on the table. I moved through each space slowly, fingertips grazing familiar wood and glass, rediscovering the rhythm of my own home. The photo of my parents waited on the mantel, frame repaired, candle stub beside it. I lifted it carefully and placed it back in the center, exactly where it had been before everything shifted. Next to it, I laid a folded page from my journal, in my handwriting, faint but steady. It read, "I stopped paying for peace and started earning it." The words looked almost too simple for everything they carried, yet they filled the room with something that felt truer than sound. I brewed coffee and opened the window wide. The wind rushed in, carrying the scent of melted snow and distant cedar. For a long while, I just stood there, listening. No voices, no footsteps, no echoes of old arguments, only the quiet pulse of the valley below. When I finally stepped outside, the snow gave way beneath my boots, soft and wet, revealing patches of new grass beneath. The mountains stretched endless and patient before me, and for the first time, I didn't think about what I'd lost, only what I'd kept.